Hi everyone, welcome to Module 3, Part 3 of our Risk Assessment course. This is Yu from the University of Minnesota, and in this module, we will look at one of the case studies that applies control bending tools to assess emerging technology. In this section, our objective is to understand and apply control bending frameworks in real-world scenarios. In this case study, we're looking at a novel drug delivery scenario. A pharmaceutical manufacturing company is delivering a new active pharmaceutical ingredient, or API, for use in medication. The chemical properties of this API suggest it has high potency and potential toxicity, but no occupational exposure limits are available. Because comprehensive toxicological data is lacking, the company uses the NIEHS occupational exposure banding process to assess the potential risks to workers and determine appropriate measures to control those exposures. Step 1 in the process is hazard identification. In this scenario, the API is classified under the Globally Harmonized System Hazard Codes, which called GHS. It carries the classification H300, fatal if swallowed, H315, causes skin irritation, H332, harmful if inhaled, H334, may cause respiratory sensitization. These hazard codes indicate that substance poses both acute toxicity risks and potential for respiratory sensitization, underscoring the need for robust exposure controls. Because both inhalation and dermal exposure are significant concerns for this substance, the company applies the NIEHS occupational exposure banding framework to evaluate and manage their worker exposure risks. Step 2 is OEB determination. In this step, we use Tier 1 of the NIEHS 3-tiered occupational exposure banding approach. This method maps the API's GHS hazard classifications from Step 1 to an appropriate occupational exposure band category. Continuing with Step 2, here we see how the API's GHS hazard classifications are mapped to specific occupational exposure bands under the NIEHS Tier 1 approach. For acute oral toxicity, classified as H300, the API is assigned to band E, with an exposure range of less than or equal to 0.01 milligrams per cubic meter. Respiratory sensitization H334 falls into band D, or 0.01 to 0.1 milligrams per cubic meter. Acute inhalation toxicity H332 is placed in band C, which ranges from 0.1 to 1 milligram per cubic meter. Lastly, skin irritation H315 is not considered a limiting factor in this case. These bands provide a starting point for determining the appropriate control measures in later steps. For risk management purposes, the most stringent band, OEBE, is selected. This indicates a need for highly controlled environments to minimize worker exposure. In Step 3, we estimate the exposure potential using the COSHH essential models, which stands for Control of Substances Hazardous to Health. Several factors are considered. First, physical form of the substance is a fine powder, which has a high likelihood of becoming airborne. Second, the amount handled involves small-scale laboratory and pilot production batches of about 500 grams. Third, the work activities include weighing, transferring, and mixing powders, all of which can increase exposure risk. Finally, the frequency of exposure is high as these are daily tasks for formulation scientists. Given the high potency of the compound, its fine particle size, and the fact that it is handled frequently, the exposure potential is considered high. This means that strong engineering controls, such as enclosed handling systems or local exhaust ventilation, are necessary, along with strict personal protective equipment requirements to protect workers. The COSHH essential model is a useful tool, but it does have a known limitation. In certain cases, it can underestimate actual exposure levels. This limitation is particularly important to keep in mind for tasks involving fine powders with high inhalation potential. In fact, research such as the work by Jones and NIEHS in 2006 has documented this issue. To address this gap, it's worth considering more specific tools like the Stofan Manager Nano or STM 2.0. This can help identify both primary and secondary contaminant measures, which may offer more targeted guidance than the general engineering controls suggested by COSHH Essentials. Based on the assigned OEB, we now select appropriate exposure control measures for API handling. From an engineering control perspective, this could mean implementing closed contaminant systems using local exhaust ventilation or working in negative pressure rooms to prevent airborne spread. In some cases, substitution could be considered, such as switching from fine powders to granular or liquid forms to reduce dust generalization. Administrative controls are also essential. This includes restricting access to authorized personnel, ensuring comprehensive worker training, and maintaining accurate batch documentation. Finally, personal protective equipment is a critical last line of defense. This can include respiratory protection, gloves, and protective clothing, ensuring workers are fully shielded from potential exposure. Step 5 is about implementation and monitoring, ensuring that our safety protocols are not only in place but also effective over time. We start with immediate action, making sure all workers are trained in handling protocols and proper PPE use. Next, engineering controls are installed and validated to confirm their functioning as needed. Exposure monitoring follows with real-time air sampling and personal measurements to track potential worker exposure. We then move to ongoing review, reassessing exposure bands, and adjusting controls as necessary. Finally, in the optimization phase, PPE and control measures are refined based on collected data, ensuring continuous improvement in worker protection.
This lesson has been created by the Interdisciplinary Training, Education, and Research Activities for Assessing and Controlling Contaminants from Emerging Technologies Program, a collaboration of the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, the University of Iowa College of Public Health, and the University of California, Los Angeles Fielding School of Public Health. Funding for InTERACCT is provided by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences of the National Institutes of Health. The content of this lesson is the sole responsibility of the developers and does not necessarily represent the official views of the National Institutes of Health.